Today's episode takes us to the island of Sumatra and its surrounding region. The island of Sumatra is part of the modern country of Indonesia and has historically watched over one of the most important shipping lanes in global history due to its geographical location at the gateway of the Sinosphere and the Far East. When the cultures of India began to influence the region from around 2,000 years ago, this sowed the seeds for a political power to emerge that would control the shipping lanes and gain wealth because of them. However, whoever would gain supreme control of this region would surely be challenged, if not by opponents in the region, then by the powerful nations at the end of these trade routes in India and China. This is the story of the earliest known substantial power to emerge in this region over 1,300 years ago, and one that we call Srivijaya. The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Stock up and save big on shoes, tops, dresses, accessories, and more must-haves for summer. Join the Nordy Club to unlock exclusive discounts, shop new arrivals first, and more. Plus, buy online and pick up at your favorite Rack store for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Volume 4. The Medieval World. Episode 78. Srivijaya. This episode takes us to Southeast Asia, but this time it focuses on the far south of the Southeast Asian peninsula and the islands of the Malay archipelago to the south of the Southeast Asian peninsula. The Southeast Asian peninsula narrows considerably at its most southern point, which is the Malay Peninsula. At the tip of the Malay Peninsula is the island country of Singapore, which sits on the Singapore Strait, the easternmost strait of water that represents the gateway to the Strait of Malacca, a very important historical shipping lane which connects China to the Western world. On the southern side of the strait is the island of Sumatra. Sumatra is a large island, the sixth largest in the world after Greenland, New Guinea, Borneo, Madagascar and Canada's Baffin Island. At Sumatra's southern tip is another strait of water which separates it from the island of Java. This is the Sunda Strait, which has also served its purpose as an important shipping lane, especially during the early period of Dutch occupation in the 17th and 18th centuries. The Sunda Strait is also the location of the fearsome volcano called Krakatoa, which we will talk more about in Volume 6. It is this area of the world which we will be focusing our attention on for this episode as we discuss the emergence of the maritime empire of Srivijaya. These islands were inhabited by Austronesian speakers who are known for their maritime migrations from Southeast Asia throughout the Malay archipelago and beyond to the Pacific Islands including New Zealand, as well as the African island of Madagascar. The Austronesians who settled the geographical area that is the subject of today's podcast episode are the Malay people, who remain ethnically identifiable to the present day. The peoples of this area were already well acquainted with the peoples of the Indian subcontinent, as there had existed a maritime trade relationship between Indian and Austronesian traders. This added to the cultural diversity of the emerging polities of the Malay peoples. The collapse of Han China in the 3rd century meant that China fragmented, and these fragmented polities had to look beyond the traditional Silk Road in order to trade with the West. So maritime options had to be taken seriously, and with the maritime Silk Road needing to pass through the Malay archipelago, this brought wealth and power to the societies of the Malay archipelago. It would be during these centuries that Sanskrit writing and Buddhism started to be recognised on Sumatra, clearly both being introduced by Indian traders looking to trade both with Southeast Asia and China beyond. From early centuries, there was a definite fusion of Southeast Asian and Indian culture already well in place before the rise of Srivijaya. This can also be demonstrated by an inscribed rock discovered on a riverbed in West Java during the 19th century, which dates back to the 5th century and details a local kingdom with links to Hinduism called Tarumanagara. Other inscribed stones discovered in a similar area validate this as factual.
I Ching.
The 7th century saw the rise of the Tang dynasty in China. It was in Tang China that we become aware of the story of a Buddhist monk called I Ching. I Ching was highly influenced by Buddhism from a young age, and he was very keen to travel to the Buddhist homelands of India. The safest route to India from China during this period was by boat, and so while he was in his 30s in the year 671, Yi Jing would depart from the port city of Guangzhou in the South China Sea, and after 22 days of travelling, Yi Jing would arrive at the east coast of the island of Sumatra. Towards the southern end of Sumatra is the mouth of the Musi River, and by sailing upstream, Yi Jing was able to arrive at a settlement called Palembang. Palembang was already the thriving centre of a kingdom that had been established on the island of Sumatra. It was a kingdom centred on the fertility of the Musi River system. The kingdom at Palembang was established by Malay-speaking chieftains, and they named their kingdom Srivijaya, which is a Sanskrit reference to them being the glorious and successful conquerors of their lands. Palembang was the capital city of this kingdom, and Yi Jing would actually stay as a guest in Palembang for a number of months studying Sanskrit before continuing on with his journey to India. Yi Jing was highly impressed by the Buddhist piety within Srivijaya and would comment on the work of the monks, recommending that Chinese Buddhist monks could learn a considerable amount from the monks of Srivijaya. Reference to Srivijaya can also be found on an inscription that was discovered in the year 1920 on the banks of a Musi River tributary. The inscription is called the Kedukan Bukit inscription, written on a stone in the old Malay language using Pallava script, a script that originated in India. It references the actions of a Srivijaya ruler making a spiritual journey in the presence of thousands of troops, signifying the existing power of Srivijaya. It has been dated to the year 683, so not too long after the first contact of the Chinese monk, I Ching, so all of this suggests that the Srivijaya kingdom was already very well established and very powerful by the later decades of the 7th century. We can get an indication of Srivijaya's outward ambitions within the writings of I Ching when he describes the conquest of the Malayu kingdom just further north of Srivijaya on the island of Sumatra. The significance of this conquest meant that Srivijaya was looking to rapidly expand its influence to other areas of the island, and therefore the important shipping routes associated with the waters surrounding Srivijaya, and particularly the Strait of Malacca. I Ching's personal presence in Srivijaya is likely to have had a positive impact too. I Ching did make it to India, where he spent a significant amount of time before heading back to the east. He would find himself back in Srivijaya, where he would spend even more time, particularly carrying out work on traditional Buddhist scriptures, translating them from Sanskrit to Chinese. He remained there for 4 years before he would require more writing materials such as the paper and ink that was used in China but was alien to Srivijaya. I Ching would also wish to gain some assistance from others in his work. As the story goes, I Ching boarded a merchant vessel bound for China to inform the crew of his requirements. While on the boat, a great wind blew the boat into the open seas, with I Ching himself becoming an accidental passenger. With the boat now in the open seas, the decision was made to take advantage of the opportunity to be able to use the winds to travel to China, and I Ching simply had to go with them. I Ching would return to Srivijaya with 4 new assistants and therefore was able to set up a school of translation. China would give Srivijaya ease with which to trade with them through the port at Guangzhou, and in return Srivijaya would pay a tribute to China. The king of Srivijaya at the time of I Ching's time there was Srijayanasa, regarded as the first Maharaja, or Great King of Srivijaya. Srijayanasa is believed to be the same king that was mentioned in the Kedukan Bukit inscription. Srijayanasa is also the same king who successfully conquered the Malayu kingdom, opening the door to controlling the lucrative Strait of Malacca. With control of the strait, Srivijaya could benefit from the ability to tax all traffic passing through the strait, adding to the financial affluence of the kingdom. With all of this power, Srijayanasa would be able to campaign throughout the island of Sumatra, pretty much bringing the entire island under his influence. By the turn of the 8th century, Srijayanasa had extended his influence beyond the island of Sumatra. He would bring the southernmost societies of the Malay Peninsula under his authority, thereby controlling both sides of the Strait of Malacca. The northernmost tip of Java was also under his control, meaning that any alternative ideas of commuting from India to China via the southern tip of Sumatra by the Sunda Strait would not help traffic to avoid taxation. Srivijaya would also control the westernmost societies of the island of Borneo, which meant that they could potentially oversee everything travelling through the Natuna Sea. It is also thought that the expansion of Srivijaya led to the decline of the Hindu kingdom of Tarumanagara, which we mentioned earlier in the episode. The open seas were often a hotbed for pirates, and the seas around the island of Sumatra were no different. Fortunately for Maharaja Srivijaya, he was now accruing the wealth to be able to combat this, and he would be able to buy off the pirates to prevent them from attacking Srivijaya ships. So Srivijaya was now controlling the large part of the South China Sea. However, it is very important to clarify something at this stage. Not all of what I have just told you is necessarily true. The concept of an imperial maritime polity called Srivijaya is something that has only really been recognised by scholars in the most recent 100 years, and this is because Srivijaya has been construed from various written evidences that refer to the kings and kingdom by different names, and experts have interpreted those various evidences as referring to the same things. Written records from China, Arabic peoples and the various societies of both mainland and maritime Southeast Asia do not all refer to Srivijaya, but students of these texts believe that they do refer to Srivijaya, but by a different name, and this is because of there being a logical connection between what these texts describe and the contemporary stone inscriptions found around Palembang and Bangka Island, which is the large island facing the mouth of the Musi River.
Trade.
On one hand, it could be considered to be an act of conquest or subjugation for one country to become a vassal state to another, but in the case of China it was seen as an honour only reserved for the most deserving of states. So when Srivijaya became a vassal state of China, it would be China's way of stating that Srivijaya was a trusted ally, and as such Srivijaya could enjoy the fruitful trade relationship and the political strength that came with such an arrangement. If there was any unrest in maritime Southeast Asia, then China would support Srivijaya in being an official mediator of the whole region. For China, this would keep this lucrative and somewhat essential trade route friendly and open, which is something that was not always guaranteed along the land-based Silk Road. If we are to take it for granted that the land known as Somboja to the Chinese is the very same Srivijaya that is the subject of this episode, then we can find some indication of some of the items that Srivijaya had to offer to China. It is thought that Srivijaya was able to acquire its own spices and aromatics in exchange for those exotic spices and aromatics which could be found in China. Sandalwood is a common wood to be found in the Malay archipelago, and it was highly sought after as both its wood and oil are noted for not only being fragrant but also for remaining fragrant for a long period of time. This made it a highly sought after variety of wood and of high value compared to other types of wood. This was a good natural resource for Srivijaya. Srivijaya may have maintained a good degree of control over the goods coming in and out of the country by building storage facilities so that traders could store and trade with relative ease. This could be useful if the weather was found too inclement for travel, so the storage facilities could be utilised. So even though traders from Srivijaya could pool local resources such as ivory and tin, it could also bolster the amount of these products in storage by allowing the storage of ivory from South Asia and tin from East Asia. The diversity of different products coming through Srivijaya made it the central maritime trade hub of the Eastern world. By this time, both silk and porcelain were being produced in quantity by China, and fine textiles were being produced in India and the Middle East. All of these exotic products were passing through Srivijaya. Sumatra was also an island that was a source of precious stones and metals such as gold. The success of Srivijaya was due to it being in the right geographical place at the right political time. It controlled the maritime gateway between East and West at a time when the land-based Silk Road was a very troublesome trade route.
Religion.
As we have already discussed during this episode, cultures from the Indian subcontinent had created a heavy influence on maritime Southeast Asia, and this is how Hinduism and Buddhism predate the emergence of Srivijaya. It may have been thanks to the work of the Chinese monk I Ching that Srivijaya was seen as a worthy place to visit for Buddhists wishing to learn more about the right way to live. Theravada Buddhism had emerged in Sri Lanka and had migrated into the lands of the modern country of Myanmar, a mainland Southeast Asian country. The style of Buddhism which flourished in Srivijaya was Mahayana Buddhism, which further cements the connection with India, as this is where Mahayana Buddhism migrated to modern Indonesia from. When Srivijaya started to spread their influence to the other side of the Strait of Malacca onto mainland Asia via the Malay Peninsula, they transferred both Mahayana Buddhism and Hinduism there. It is highly likely that the established Buddhist centres of learning and the control of piracy in the region made Srivijaya an attractive destination of pilgrimage for Buddhists, especially those from China wishing to discover more from the lands of Buddhist origin in India. The influence of the centres of learning helped Mahayana Buddhism to become more successful in this global region. As we travel north onto the Malay Peninsula, we cross the border from the modern country of Malaysia to the modern country of Thailand. In the Surat Thani province of southern Thailand, there exists a Buddhist temple called Wat Varaborama Thatchaya, and this particular temple is described as being built in the Srivijaya style, which demonstrates how deeply northward onto the Malay Peninsula that Srivijaya influence reached. Sadly, not much in the way of Srivijaya building work has survived though. A considerable effort is required to find Srivijaya temples, as it is believed that many of them were built using perishable materials. The Muaro Jambi temple compounds in Sumatra were occupied throughout the Srivijaya period, but are thought maybe to have been initiated by the Malayu kingdom, which we learned to be absorbed by Srivijaya in the late 7th century. The temple compounds are situated on the northern banks of the Batanghari River, not too far from the city of Jambi. Several temples and stupas exist at the site and can be visited to this very day. During the 9th century there was a significant increase in power of the Chola dynasty of India, which led to there being a Chola empire. During the 10th century, Srivijaya influence in India started to increase, which led to the construction of temple buildings by Srivijaya in the town of Nagapattinam in Tamil Nadu in the south of India. As we know, Srivijaya was centred on the island of Sumatra and extended its influence to the island of Java to its south. The island of Java was also the home of another kingdom called the Mataram Kingdom, which has also been known as the Medang Kingdom. The Mataram Kingdom was ruled at some point by a royal dynasty called the Shailendra dynasty, and at some point this ruling dynasty also became the rulers of Srivijaya. This could have been achieved by political marriage or even by conquest, but it was under the Shailendras that Srivijaya were able to build their temples in the Chola lands of southern India.
The Chola Empire.
The construction of Srivijaya temple buildings in Chola lands was while Srivijaya was under the rule of the Shailendra dynasty. We know that the societies of the Southeast Asian islands were strongly influenced by Indian cultures long before this period, so it is unsurprising that there would be a strong relationship between Indian cultures and Srivijaya going forward, especially with the religious and cultural links that they shared. What we also know, especially from Chinese behaviour, is that it would be beneficial for both Indian and Chinese cultures to be able to have some form of influence over the societies in the middle of their trade route with each other, such as Srivijaya. The competitiveness for control and influence over this trade route was bound to result in some form of conflict, especially if any one party felt that any kind of political shift could result in an economical disaster for them. So, although there is a lack of firm information about the specific political situation in Srivijaya, this alone can create a mask for what is likely to have been a precarious and sensitive political situation and balance in actual fact. Whether or not the Shailendra dynasty tried to rule both Srivijaya and Mataram as one kingdom at any point is a matter for argument. There is just not enough firm evidence to be able to categorically state what the exact political relationship would have been. Both Srivijaya and Mataram may have been ruled by members of the Shailendra dynasty towards the end of the 10th century, for example, but that doesn't mean that the relationship between the two kingdoms was harmonious. In fact, it does seem that there was tension between Srivijaya and Mataram, and that Mataram had ambitions of conquest of Srivijaya. As we say, the details are sketchy and open to interpretation, but scholars accept that the kingdom of Srivijaya still existed as a polity throughout this period. It also appears that China was being called upon by Srivijaya to assist with maintaining its power against its local neighbours. Interestingly, the Mataram kingdom disappears from existence early in the 11th century. What happened next appears to be unexpected. It was the year 1026 and the ruler of Chola was Rajendra the Great. Rajendra rapidly expanded Chola influence from the southern tip of India up the east coast to the Ganges river valley, and his imperial ambitions did not stop there. The lucrative trade routes to the east may have been subject to Srivijaya regulation, which Rajendra may have felt was restricting Chola ability to trade. Srivijaya was likely attempting to balance its diplomatic ties with the key players in the east-west maritime trade route, which by now was the Song dynasty of China and the Chola Empire in India. In the process of doing this, it seems that Srivijaya may have reaffirmed its position as a form of protectorate state of Song China, which would have unsettled Rajendra the Great in Chola. In 1025, Rajendra launched a series of attacks on strategical locations throughout Southeast Asia. Notably, he attacked Kedah, which was a territory on the Malay Peninsula of mainland Southeast Asia, and was a territory under the control of Srivijaya. Rajendra also sailed up the Musi River and attacked the capital city of Palembang. Although the Chola attack on these locations in Southeast Asia was not an attack of total conquest, Chola influence on the region increased, and Srivijaya may have weakened as a consequence. This would be significant because even though Srivijaya had monopolised the Strait of Malacca, the societies of Java were keen to try to take control and utilise the lands around the Sunda Strait to present a viable alternative for sailing merchants.
Local rivalry.
The island of Java was a fertile island, so societies on the island generally prospered despite living in comparative isolation. The Shailendra dynasty that ruled Srivijaya is believed to have originated from the island of Java. The Chola invasion of Srivijaya proved to be disastrous for the Shailendra dynasty, as the Chola captured the Shailendra king Sangrama Vijaytungavarman, and this opened the door for the Shailendra dynasty to be challenged as the rulers of Srivijaya. The Chola invasion had fundamentally compromised Srivijaya's position of dominance over the entire region that had enabled it to control and influence trade routes from east to west and vice versa. Local challenges to the dominance of Srivijaya had always threatened to stifle their strong position, and these distractions might have left them to some degree vulnerable to Chola attacks. There is definitely a notable weakening of Srivijaya dominance of the waterways after the Chola attacks, and levels of piracy increased, which was something that Srivijaya previously had a stronger control over. Very little in the way of specific details exist about what happened over the course of the 11th and 12th centuries to Srivijaya, because we have a lack of written evidence. So we have to review what little evidence we have and try to suggest a likely sequence of events. Even though we cite the Chola invasions as something that significantly weakened Srivijaya, we do know that Srivijaya was still a significant political entity during this period. To understand how this operated, we have to look at what we believe we do know about the politics of maritime Southeast Asia during these centuries. Much confusion exists for historians studying this period, mainly because it appears that many different city-states or centres of power existed, and their names are often recorded differently by the different cultures who encountered them. So it is difficult to understand who is who when trying to categorically identify them. The understood political arrangement of Srivijaya is that it was a mandala. The mandala arrangement is something that is somewhat specific to Southeast Asia during this period, and it originates from the Sanskrit word for circle. Essentially, the central power at Palembang controlled what we refer to as Srivijaya, and those settlements or tribal chieftains that recognised the king of Srivijaya as their overlord are what made Srivijaya powerful and influential. So if any of these settlements or tribal chieftains then decided to no longer recognise the king of Srivijaya as their overlord, then Srivijaya power would diminish. The contrast to this would be to compare this to the countries of medieval Europe, who would often fight over areas of land and bring them under one rule. Srivijaya influence was less about obtaining areas of land and more about obtaining loyalty. So when Srivijaya started losing control of the open waters, the loyalty of those who had previously been affiliated to Srivijaya started to wane, and Srivijaya would become less powerful, which over time meant that other centralised influencers could step in and begin to increase their own power base in the region. Certainly trying to control one critical narrow waterway trade passage would have been a challenge for Srivijaya, but controlling two would have been almost impossible, and it is a testament to their success that they were able to remain so relevant for so long. Very early in Srivijaya's existence, when they came into contact with the Chinese monk Yi Jing, it appears that Srivijaya had extended its influence northwards over the Malayu kingdom. In the aftermath of the Chola invasions, it does appear that there was a re-emergence of the Malayu kingdom that decided to oppose Srivijaya, therefore possibly taking the power over half of the island of Sumatra away from Srivijaya's influence, and this may have happened before the close of the 11th century. This now meant that the Strait of Malacca had been lost, which was of profound importance to everyone. From here, there was really no way back for Srivijaya, and the Malayu kingdom would look to extend its influence over Palembang and the south of Sumatra too. By the end of the 12th century, this appears to have been achieved successfully.
have one new message. Translating. Disney and Pixar's Hoppers is now available on Disney+.
You could say that again.
Critics are calling it Pixar's funniest movie ever and a wildly entertaining ride. Blizzard Potato. It's certified fresh and verified hot.
Now we party.
This is incredible!
Wow, I am clearing the rest of the day.
Disney and Pixar's Hoppers, now available on Disney+. Rated PG.
Tomorrow morning is knocking. Stock your fridge now. How about a creamy mocha frappuccino drink? Or a sweet vanilla? Smooth caramel maybe? Or a white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Find Starbucks Frappuccino drinks wherever you buy your groceries.
Thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of the History of the World podcast on Srivijaya. If you enjoy the podcast and want to support the podcast, then please visit our website, historyoftheworldpodcast.com. Click on the Patreon link and sign up to make a monthly contribution. You will become a lifelong member of the History of the World podcast Illuminati, and you will qualify for gifts and rewards. This week I'd like to welcome into the Illuminati Monica McVeigh Pearson. Thank you, Monica. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate your support. Very kind. Now, if you'd like to get in touch with the podcast, then please drop me a line at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. Love reading out your messages, so please don't hesitate. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, X, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Tumblr, Threads, and Mastodon. And if you can't get enough of the podcast, then don't miss out on the special debrief episode, where I'll be talking some more about the episode that you just listened to and a few extra little bits and pieces.
Listener messages and reviews.
Just one review this week from good old Great Britain, and it's from Esfol, who's put brilliant podcast, in-depth and knowledgeable. Keep up the great work you are doing, Chris. Well, thank you very much, Esfol. Well, that's it for this week. The next episode will be on Dai Viet, which takes us to Vietnam. And if you want to listen to a little bit more, you haven't had enough, if you want to listen to a bit more chit-chat about the episode that you just listened to, then do please look out for the debrief episode that accompanies this one. But that's it for this episode. Thanks so much for listening. And as ever, until next time, be good.
Your team just added its 67th AI tool and also your 67th security blind spot. The good news? The Vanta agent works like a GRC engineer in the background, finding every app your team uses, scoring the risk, and drafting fixes for you. Vanta is the platform used by over 16,000 fast-moving companies like Ramp, Cursor, and Harvey, who are shaping the future with AI and staying ahead of AI risk. Get started at Vanta.com.
The right window treatments change everything. Your sleep, your privacy, the way every room looks and feels. At Blinds.com, we've spent 30 years making it surprisingly simple to get exactly what your home needs. We've covered over 25 million windows and have 50,000 five-star reviews to prove we deliver. Whether you DIY it or want a pro to handle everything from measure to install, we have you covered. Real design professionals, free samples, zero pressure. Right now, get up to 50% off with minimum purchase, plus get a free professional measure at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions apply.
The History of the World podcast, written and presented by Chris Hasler. Please consider making a financial contribution by going to the historyoftheworldpodcast.com website and clicking on the Patreon link. Email the show at historyoftheworldpodcast@mail.com. And don't forget to join our social media at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. See you next time.